The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Carter, I'm 38 years old, and I live in a quiet suburb in Ohio. What I'm about to tell you happened when I was 12 and living with my parents and my younger sister, Emily. We never really managed to explain what happened, and even today, when I visit my mom at that house, I still feel uneasy near that closet. Back then, we had a German Shepherd named Rusty. He was always an intelligent and protective dog, the kind that barked at strangers, but was incredibly affectionate with us. He slept at the foot of my bed almost every night and always knew when I was sad or scared. But one day, out of nowhere, he started acting strange. He spent hours sitting in front of the hallway closet, the one my mom used to store sheets and towels. He would sit there completely still, ears up, breathing heavily, as if waiting for something. At first, I thought he had caught the scent of a rat or some trapped insect, but he didn't bark or try to scratch at the door. He just sniffed the crack and let out these low, muffled growls like he was disturbed by something. This went on for days. Rusty ignored food, toys, even the walks he loved so much. He always went back to that closet, no matter how much we tried to distract him. My dad opened the door a few times to show him there was nothing inside. But Rusty didn't give up. He just kept staring, like the problem wasn't what was inside, but the wood itself. My mom thought it was funny, saying it was just a dog thing, but it started to seriously bother us. One night, I woke up to a weird noise in the hallway. It sounded like paws dragging across the wooden floor. I opened my eyes and noticed Rusty wasn't at the foot of my bed. When I stepped out of my room, I found him sitting in front of the closet, his breathing quick and ears pointed forward. The hallway was dark, but I could see he was trembling slightly. I didn't want to, but I took a step forward. The moment I did, I heard a very faint noise, like scratching from inside the closet. My heart froze. I stood there, trying to figure out if I had really heard it, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But Rusty was focused, his nose pressed against the crack. This wasn't my imagination. I ran to my parents' room and shook my dad awake. He was already tired of this whole situation, and this time he grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver to check the closet. When he opened it, the light revealed nothing but the usual shelves. Everything looked untouched. No rats, no bugs. But Rusty stayed there, the fur on his neck bristling. My dad sighed, ready to close the door, when he noticed something inside. On the inner side of the door, there were scratches. They weren't new. They were deep and old, as if they had been there for a long time. They looked like nail marks, 5 parallel lines running down, as if something had tried to claw its way out. My dad went silent for a moment, then ran his hand over the grooves. "Must be from the previous owner," he muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. But I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't like it at all. My mom insisted it was nothing, that maybe a cat had been trapped in there before we moved in. But Rusty wouldn't stop. He growled at the wood, sniffed the air like he could still sense something. My dad tried to calm him down, saying he'd sand and paint over the wood the next day, but Rusty refused to move from that spot. That night, we locked the closet with a chain, just in case. I don't know why, but we all felt uneasy. I barely slept and woke up to Rusty whining in the hallway again. When I stepped out of my room, I noticed a strange smell in the air. Something old and stale, like damp wood that had been shut away for too long. Rusty had his nose pressed against the crack of the door, and for a second, I swear I saw the chain sway on its own. The next morning, my dad sanded down the wood and painted over the door, trying to erase those marks. After that, Rusty finally stopped staring at the closet. But for weeks, every time he walked past it, he would quicken his pace, like he wanted to get away as fast as possible. Years later, while talking to an older neighbor, I found out that the family who lived there before us had a son who disappeared without a trace. He was just a kid, vanished from the house, and they never found any clue as to what happened. I never told my mom about it, and I prefer not to think about it too much. But every time I go back to that house, I avoid looking at that closet. And sometimes I swear I can still smell that strange scent in the air. My name is Caleb. I'm 31 years old, and I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I've never really been the kind of guy who believes in those weird stories people post online, but something happened to me when I was a kid that still gives me chills every time I think about it. I've never told anyone because I always thought people would laugh or say I imagined the whole thing. But the more time passes, the more I realize that it wasn't just in my head. I must have been around 10 years old when I got a goldfish as a gift from my dad. I wanted a dog, but my mom said dogs were too messy and decided a fish was the most I could have. I picked out a pretty normal little goldfish at the pet store and named him Sunny. It wasn't the most creative name, but I thought it fit. He stayed in a glass tank on top of my dresser. I always forgot to feed him, but he seemed fine anyway. One night, I woke up out of nowhere. I looked at the alarm clock and saw it was exactly 3 a.m. That was already strange because I've always been a heavy sleeper. I didn't know why I'd woken up, but I felt a weird discomfort, like someone else was in the room. I turned to look around and my eyes went straight to Sunny's tank. That's when my heart skipped a beat. He was floating belly up. I froze. I didn't know much about fish, but everyone knows that when a fish floats upside down like that, it means it's dead. I felt a lump in my throat, but at the same time, I didn't know what to do. My parents were asleep, and I didn't want to wake them. After a few seconds staring at him, I decided I'd throw Sunny away in the morning. But before I could get out of bed, he started moving. I'm not talking about a twitch or anything like that. He just flipped over and started swimming like nothing had happened. Right then, I felt a knot in my stomach. It didn't make sense. He was dead seconds ago. Now he was swimming back and forth, calm as ever. I stared at the tank for a while, trying to make sense of it. In the end, I convinced myself I must have imagined it and went back to sleep. The next day, Sunny looked totally normal. I even felt relieved, thinking maybe it was just in my head. But that night, I woke up again. I looked at the clock, 3 a.m. I knew I didn't want to look at the tank, but I couldn't help it. And there he was, floating again, dead. But this time, I just waited. My heart was pounding. A few seconds passed. Then, just like the night before, he moved, flipped over and started swimming again. On the third night, I tried to fight off sleep. I didn't want to go through that again, but it didn't work. When I opened my eyes, I looked straight at the clock, 3 o'clock on the dot. This time, something made me get out of bed and walk over to the tank. I looked closely, and there was Sunny, floating. But something was different. Before he even came back to life, the water around him was weird, full of tiny bubbles slowly rising, like the whole tank was breathing. Each night it got worse. On the fourth night, when I woke up, there was a strange smell in the room, like something wet and kind of rotten. The tank water looked murkier, and when Sunny came back to life, I got the feeling he knew I was watching. I know how that sounds, but I swear he paused and looked right at me, like he was waiting for something. I told my mom at breakfast, but she laughed and said I was dreaming. My dad suggested I change the tank water, so I did. But that night, it happened again. On the sixth night, I woke up before the clock hit 3. Something had startled me. I was sweating, heart racing. I looked at the tank, and Sunny was already floating. But this time, he wasn't alone. There was something else in the water. I couldn't see it clearly, but I swear there was something there, a shadowy shape deep in the tank, like it was waiting. I wanted to run, scream, wake up my parents, but I couldn't move. The thing in the tank seemed to shift slightly, and the moment it did, Sunny sprang back to life once again. The next day I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed Sunny and flushed him down the toilet. I watched as he disappeared, heart pounding, but deep down I felt relieved. I thought it was finally over. Or at least I thought so. That night I fell asleep without thinking about any of it. But right at 3 a.m., I woke up again. A chill ran down my spine before I even opened my eyes. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The tank was full of water again, and inside it Sunny was swimming calmly. I've never screamed so loud in my life. My parents burst into the room and turned on the light. When I looked again, the tank was empty, dry, with no sign of water. After that, nothing ever happened again. But to this day, every time I see a goldfish, I get a weird chill in my stomach. And the worst part is, once in a while, I still wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. And when I check the clock, it always says 3 a.m. My name is Nathaniel, but everyone calls me Nate. I'm 38 years old and live in a small town in Tennessee called Fairview. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghost stories, and until that day, I had never seen anything that made me change my mind. But something happened to me about 10 years ago that I just can't forget. I've tried to find a logical explanation, I've researched it, I've talked to people who have lived in the area longer than I have, but no one can tell me what happened that night. Initio. My name is Nathaniel, but everyone calls me Nate. I'm 38 years old and live in a small town in Tennessee called Fairview. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghost stories, and until that day, I had never seen anything that made me change my mind. But something happened to me about 10 years ago that I just can't forget. I've tried to find a logical explanation, I've researched it, I've talked to people who have lived in the area longer than I have, but no one can tell me what happened that night. At the time, I worked as a night security guard at a lumber yard near the main road. My shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, and most of the time I just sat in my car, listening to the radio and waiting for the hours to pass. The town was small, so not much happened. At most, an occasional truck passing by, a few lights on in the distant farms, and sometimes the howl of a coyote echoing across the road. But that night, something felt different. It was almost midnight when I decided to take a drive. I always did that around the middle of my shift, more out of habit than necessity. I grabbed my coffee and drove slowly down the dirt road that passed near the town's cemetery. It was an old place, small, surrounded by a rusty iron fence. I had never seen anyone there at night, and I doubted anyone went there much during the day either. Most of the headstones were so worn down by time that you could barely read the names. But that night, as I got closer to the gate, I saw something that made me stop the car. A pack of stray dogs was gathered near the entrance. What caught my attention was their behavior. They weren't rummaging through trash, fighting or sniffing around like they normally would. They were standing still, positioned in an odd way, and all of them were staring in the same direction. I followed their gaze and saw that they were focused on a single grave, a little farther back, near the trees at the edge of the cemetery. The dogs were in a circle, as if surrounding that grave, and they were all howling in a long, low tone that sent chills down my spine. The scene made me uneasy. I had seen dogs howling before, but this was different. It wasn't a communication or warning sound. It sounded like mourning. The strangest part was that none of them got closer to the gravestone. They stayed on the edge, as if there was an invisible line they couldn't cross. I slowed down and rolled down the window. The air outside felt heavy. There was no wind, and even though the night was cold, I felt an odd, suffocating heat. For a moment, I had the impression that time was moving differently in that place. I can't explain it, but it was like I had stepped into a space where everything was suspended. The sound of my car engine seemed distant, and the air itself felt thick. I decided to get out and take a look. I grabbed my flashlight, and as soon as I stepped onto the ground, the dogs stopped howling, all at once. The silence that followed was even worse. They turned to face me, without growling, without running away, just watching. My gut told me to get back in the car, but my curiosity won out. I walked slowly up to the fence and shined the light on the grave. The headstone was covered in moss, and the name carved into it was almost completely worn away. I could only make out the first part, Edgar. The rest was too eroded to read. But what really unsettled me was the dirt around the grave. It had been disturbed, like someone had recently dug there. Before I could figure out what to do, the dogs started howling again. But this time, it sounded different. It wasn't just a lament. It sounded like a warning. One of the dogs, a large, dark-haired mutt, took a step back, as if afraid. That's when I heard it. It was a low sound, almost imperceptible, coming from beneath the ground, like something scraping. My heart started pounding. The first thing I thought was that someone had tampered with the grave and left an animal trapped inside. But it didn't make sense. It wasn't the sound of digging or of paws hitting wood. It was a slower, irregular noise, like something moving deliberately. My entire body tensed, and I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. My instincts kicked in, and without thinking twice, I ran back to my car. As I slammed the door shut and started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dogs were still there, but now they were silent, just staring at the grave. I drove back to the lumberyard with my breath uneven. My hands were sweating, and I kept trying to come up with a reasonable explanation for what had just happened, but nothing made sense. The next day, I went back to the cemetery during daylight. The grave was there, just the same. No sign of disturbed earth, no evidence that anything had moved. The dogs were nowhere to be seen. I decided to ask one of the cemetery caretakers if he knew anything. He was an old man who had worked there for years. I asked if he remembered anyone named Edgar buried there. He frowned, thought for a moment, and said he didn't recall any Edgar, at least not anyone buried there recently. When I told him about the dogs, he gave me a strange look. He said that from time to time some townspeople talked about it, but no one paid much attention. According to him, they had tried chasing the dogs away before, but they always came back. The weirdest part was that they never went to another grave. Always that one. I've tried to forget what I saw that night, but I never could. I spent years searching for an explanation, but nothing I found ever made sense. Sometimes I still drive by that road at night, and even when I don't see anything, I feel a chill, like something there is still waiting. My name is Graham McKinley. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Rochester, New York, with my wife Lisa and our cat Baxter. What happened to us a few months ago still unsettles me. I was never the kind of person who believed in supernatural things, but after that week, I have to admit that my certainty about what's real and what's not has never been the same. Baxter has always been a calm cat. You know, the lazy type that only gets up to eat and then flops back onto a pillow? That's him. But out of nowhere, he started acting strangely, especially in our bedroom. Every night when we went to bed, he would stare at a spot on the wall near the door, his eyes wide open, following something as if it were moving slowly. At first, I thought it was a bug, but there was never anything there. Even so, he remained fixated on that same spot, as if he was waiting for something to appear. The first night, I thought it was funny. Lisa even joked, saying he must be seeing ghosts. We laughed and moved on. But over the next few days, it got worse. Baxter started raising his paws and trying to attack the wall. Have you ever seen a cat hunting something? The way they crouch down and then pounce quickly? That's what he was doing. But he was attacking nothing. On the fourth night, he got so agitated that he knocked over Lisa's bedside lamp. When I went to pick him up, I felt his body tense, like he was about to leap from my hands. The worst part was that even after we pulled him away, his eyes kept following something that seemed to be moving along the wall, heading toward the ceiling. Lisa got nervous and said we should leave the room for a bit. We went to the living room, but Baxter stayed by the door, staring down the hallway, his ears flat and his tail thumping against the floor. By the sixth night, I woke up to a very faint noise, like a whisper coming from the same direction he always stared at. It was so soft that at first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I stayed in bed for a while, trying to figure out if I was imagining things. But then I heard it again. It sounded like someone was speaking very quietly, quickly, without me being able to make out the words. My first reaction was to think the sound was coming from the neighbors, but we live in a house with no shared walls. When I looked over, Lisa was awake too, completely still. She looked at me and whispered, "Are you hearing that?" I got up slowly and walked to the wall. I pressed my ear against it, trying to make sense of the sound. But it was strange. It didn't seem like a noise coming from the other side of the wall. It felt like it was inside the room itself, like it was floating there, right in the corner near the ceiling. Baxter, who was on the floor, started growling. I had never seen him do that before. It was a low, guttural sound, completely different from his normal meow. He crouched like he was about to pounce again and then leaped hard at the wall, clawing at the air. Only this time, the sound stopped instantly. We spent the rest of the night in the living room. Neither of us wanted to stay in that room. The next day, I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe it was pipes inside the wall, maybe Baxter was just reacting to some light reflection, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The following night, Baxter refused to enter the room. He stopped at the door, looked inside, and then backed away. When we tried to pick him up and bring him in, he dug his claws into my arm and jumped away. That night, we slept without him, and honestly, I kind of preferred it. That's when the worst part happened. I woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was watching me. The room was dark, but something felt off. You know, when you just feel that something is there, even if you can't see it? I looked over at Lisa, who was still asleep, breathing softly. When I turned my head to the other side, my eyes went straight to the corner of the wall where Baxter always stared. And I swear to God, at that moment, I saw a slight movement, like a shadow gliding along the wall, very slowly. My eyes took a moment to adjust, and when they did, I couldn't see anything solid. But I had this overwhelming feeling that something was there, just waiting for me to do something. The air in the room felt heavier, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was just paranoid because of everything that had happened. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. But then, the whispering started again. This time, closer. The sensation was so intense that my first instinct was to sit up and turn on the bedside lamp. As soon as the light flooded the room, the sound stopped instantly. There was nothing on the wall, nothing on the ceiling, nothing in the room besides Lisa and me. But then I noticed something. Baxter was sitting at the doorway. He didn't want to come in, but he also didn't want to leave. He was just watching. His eyes didn't blink, fixed on me. And for a brief second, I had the impression that he wasn't looking at me, but at something behind me. I turned around reflexively, my heart pounding. But the room was empty. The next day, we bought a security camera, the kind used for monitoring babies, to see if we could capture anything during the night. We set it up facing the wall, right where Baxter always stared. When we reviewed the footage the next morning, I felt a chill. Around 3 a.m., Baxter was on the floor, staring intensely at the wall as usual. But at a certain moment, the camera picked up a strange sound. This time, it wasn't exactly a whisper. It was like a faint clicking noise, followed by a soft static hum. And then, without any apparent reason, the camera simply shut off. The next day, Lisa and I decided to sleep in the guest room. I didn't want to stay in there anymore, and neither did she. That night, we didn't hear anything, and when we went back into the bedroom the next day, Baxter no longer seemed obsessed with the wall. It was as if whatever it was had simply left. In the following days, everything went back to normal. No strange noises, no bizarre behavior from Baxter. But to this day, I have no idea what happened that week. I don't know if Baxter really saw something or if it was just one of those weird cat behaviors, but I heard those whispers. Lisa heard them too. And the camera shutting off on its own? That still haunts me. Since then, nothing like that has ever happened again. But I have to admit, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I glance at that corner of the room and wait, just waiting to see something that, thankfully, never appeared again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.